Hello everyone. Welcome to the Ocean Sound Storytelling Channel. I am the storyteller. And today, I am so happy to be with you. You may be curled up under a blanket or listening with your ears on a soft pillow. Wherever you are, whatever the time, thank you for being here. Before we begin with an interesting story, please remember to like the video and subscribe to the channel, so I know you enjoy relaxing moments like this. Where are you from? Send me a little hello in the comments. I would love to know which corner of the world you are listening from. Now, relax your body. Close your eyes and let the gentle waves take you into a gentle story, a little strange, a little mysterious, but warm enough to lull you to sleep all night long. So, are you ready? Tonight's story begins. The gates of hell are open night and day, smooth the descent, and easy is the way. Virgil. They all just sat there in the heat, and they waited. The kid came back. He was walking down the platform with his head hung low, sweat running down his pimpled face, like always. He was 16, but looked more like 13, short and skinny, with longish dark hair and a black eye. The black eye was always there. It never faded. He took a seat at the end of the bench with the others and looked down at his dirty old sneakers. Roman. Same shit, little man? The kid. Yeah. Roman. I don't know why you even bother no more. They all just sat there in silence. Sandra. It's so hot today. 3 of them looked at her. Roman. Bitch. It's hot out here every day. Sandra. I told you not to call me that. Colonel Duval. Roman, please. Roman gave a tiny chuckle and pulled the pack of Newports from his pocket and lit one up. That pack was always near to full. He exhaled some smoke and looked down the tracks into the distance where the rails slowly bent off into the trees and out of sight. Sandra wrinkled her nose and waved the smoke away. Roman. Man, when this train gonna come? Brian. Why do you always ask that same question over and over? Roman. Yo, man. I already done told you to bite your tongue and stay over there, you strange-ass bitch. Don't make me get up. It's too hot for me to whip your ass right now, you silly-looking motherfucker. They all just sat there in silence. Colette fanned herself with the folded newspaper, looked down the tracks, and then handed it to the colonel, who did the same. Roman took one last drag on his cigarette and then flicked it at Brian seated at the end of the bench, bouncing it off his jeans and leaving a small horsetail of orange sparks in the air as it fell to the platform. Brian did not respond at all. Roman chuckled. The kid. I'm gonna take a walk. Roman. Seriously, man? Again? Is you retarded? The kid. Fuck off. I'm gonna take a walk. You can come with me if you want. Roman. Nah, man. I'm good, shorty. You go off and wander. I'll be cooling it right here when you get back. The kid walked off down the platform towards the exit stairs, giving Roman, or maybe all of them, the finger with his right hand held over his narrow shoulders as he departed, not looking back. As he passed the thermometer mounted on the wall, the temperature read 117 degrees Fahrenheit. Always 117 degrees Fahrenheit. Always. Colette. Can someone remind me how he got here? I know he's told me, but I just can't remember. Sandra. Me neither. They all just quietly sat there in the heat for a while, Roman looking down the tracks every minute or two. He lit another Newport from the bottomless pack. Colette and Sandra both squinted and waved the smoke away. Brian looked up at the sky. Brian, how come the sun never sets? Colette. Sandra, I forgot how you got here too. I know we've discussed this before, but I just can't seem to remember these things. Sandra, I came home from a business trip early one day and found the car that belongs to my husband's 24-year-old secretary blocking the driveway. When I entered the house, I could immediately hear the sounds coming from the bedroom. I went to the stove and blew out the pilot light and turned up the gas. Then I lit a few candles on the dining room table, left the house and drove my car halfway down the block and watched as it went up in flames a little while later. It's sad that my baby Jason was there in his crib at the time, but I really didn't want to be a single mother. That was in 1972. What year is this? Colette. Oh, that's right. That's just awful. Roman. Yo, do y'all ever plan to shut the fuck up? Making my head hurt over here. Colonel Duval. Roman. I must politely ask you once again to mind your language when speaking with the women. Roman gave him an angry stare and then flicked his cigarette butt out onto the tracks and used his black bandana to wipe the sweat off his forehead. Brian, are we ever going to get any food? When is the food coming? I'm hungry. Colette, I don't think we can get food here. Sandra, Colette, I forgot how you got here too. What awful thing did you do? Please remind me. Colette gave her an aggrieved stare for a moment, and then revealed a broad smile and answered in a flowery and friendly tone that could not have been less sincere. Colette, I didn't do anything awful, Sandra. Nothing like what you did. Your own child. Unthinkable. No, all I did was fulfill my Lord and Savior's will. When I was working in the hospital, if I saw in a patient's chart that she previously murdered an unborn child, well, I carried out God's will. I did this 6 times before they caught me. I wish it was 6,000. Sandra, I'm an atheist. Colette laughed during her brief reply. Colette, this is probably not the best place for you to cling to that silly notion, dummy. Sandra, go fuck yourself, Colette. They all went silent for a while. The heat was oppressive. There was no shade. There was no breeze. Brian, when are we going to get something to eat? Colonel Duval, son, I've been here far longer than any of you. I assure you, there will be no meals served. Brian, well, we all need water. Will we get some water at some point? The colonel ignored this query. After a while, Roman spoke up. Roman, yo, old man, remind me how you got here. Colonel Duval, I was in the war. At Antietam, we captured some rebel soldiers and we needed information about troop locations, numbers, armaments, that sort of intelligence. We did things to them to ensure that we got that information quickly, but later I was court-martialed and they hanged my commanding officer and myself in Washington for our war crimes. It was quite the scandal at that time. Roman, Antietam? Where that at, man? Iraq? Colonel Duval, no, son, that's in Maryland. Can you please remind me how you got here? I'm sorry. My memory is not what it once was. Roman, shot a few niggas. Colonel Duval, excuse me, son? Can you repeat that? Roman, yeah, I shot a few niggas just down the block from where I stay in Washington Heights. I've been running that corner for 3 years, and one day these little bitches show up and just set up shop and start serving my customers. It wasn't something I had to think about much. Shit. I also hit a delivery man bringing some cases of beer into the bodega on that corner. but I didn't mean to do that. He was just in that wrong place at the wrong time. Then I shot it out with the NYPD. It was pretty quick. I caught a few in my back and one in my neck. Anyways, man, that's how I got here. He pointed at the scar on his neck and then lit another cigarette. The kid was walking back down the platform, his olive drab green U.S. Army t-shirt heavily stained with sweat. The thermometer read 117 degrees Fahrenheit, as always. Sandra, can someone remind me how he got here? I can't seem to remember these things for long, for some reason. Colette. I don't recall either, but I'm sure he didn't burn his child to death. Sandra shot an angry look back at her, scowled and looked away, crossing her arms over her chest. Roman looked down the tracks. Sandra. Fuck you, Colette. Colette smiled, smugly. Roman. Man, when this train gonna come? Sandra. I do feel really bad about my son, Jason. I just didn't know what else to do in that moment. That's why I drove to the bridge afterwards. The kid took a seat at the end of the bench. Sandra. Hey kid, I'm sorry. Can you please remind us how you got here? The kid. I took my dad's pistol to school, and I shot a few bullies and this one asshole gym teacher. Then I shot myself. The kid never said very much. Roman. Same shit, little man? The kid. Yeah, I walked and ended up right back here, just like always. Felt like I was walking for 2 hours. Wish I had my iPhone. How long was I gone that time? Roman. I don't know, man. Maybe 4 or 5 minutes. You see anything new? The kid. Number. It doesn't matter which way I go. It's just a long, empty road, and then I pass by an empty high school that looks just like mine, and then I end up back here. He stared down at his dirty old sneakers. Colette. Maybe next time you should stop in that school and take some geography classes. She laughed at her own joke, and the kid shot her a grave look. Sandra did too. Sandra. Jean-Paul Sartre said, "Hell is other people." I think he was right. Sandra crossed her arms over her chest and looked away. Colette. How did you get here, Brian? Brian. I already told you. I took 17 women between 1985 and 1992 before I was arrested. Mostly prostitutes. Then I was on death row down in Huntsville for about 14 years until I ran out of appeals. Are they going to bring us any food? They all went silent for a while and stewed in the heat of the brutal, unyielding sun. After a few minutes, Roman looked down the tracks. Roman. Man, when this train gonna come? Colonel Duval. I wouldn't be in such a rush, son. Roman. Oh yeah, why dat? Colonel Duval paused and looked at the tracks running off in the opposite direction, towards the desert, before looking back at Roman. Colonel Duval. Well, son, we don't know where that train is going to take us, do we? He paused for another moment and stared off towards the desert again. He spoke without looking back this time. He spoke quietly. Colonel Duval. Maybe this is the best part. What if it only gets worse from here? What if this is just the beginning? Roman lit another cigarette and then turned away and quietly stared in the other direction, down the tracks to the point where the rails bent off and disappeared beyond the trees. He exhaled, and the smoke drifted down the bench towards the others. They all sat there and waited for the train. Eventually, the kid took another walk and then returned a short time later, drenched in sweat. Brian remained hungry. Colette and Sandra refused to look at one another. The colonel had a solemn cast to his face, and Roman continued to reach into his endless pack of cigarettes. The temperature was 117 degrees Fahrenheit. They all just sat there in the heat, and they waited. A thin tether of domesticity. My new wife adopted a rescue dog that came into my surgery for a simple vaccination. Typically, I try to keep a professional distance, but she fell in love with the shaggy mutt, and I was trying to be a good father to her son, little Nate. She called the dog Catch. What fun it was to make catch fetch. Fetch catch, fetch catch. It was a big tease. Faking throw ball. Making that big dog lope about looking for the ball. And one day, my stepson joined in the fun. Fetch catch, he cried, swinging his arm in that clunky toddler way. Catch followed the arc of the make-believe ball through the air, but suddenly something snapped in that canine mind, and the thin tether of domesticity severed when the dog realized it had been fooled by a small boy. Every dog is a wolf. Nate, a naked ape, didn't have a chance. I am a vet, and normally I am unaffected by blood and suffering. But this was different. My new wife lost her mind. And in that moment, I operated on a primal level of panic. I wrapped the gore in a plastic shopping bag and rushed Nate to the hospital, where the ER doctors stitched up his torn face like a patchwork quilt. But they were unable to reattach Nate's mangled arm. If only I'd been a few minutes earlier. If only I'd packed the arm in ice. I am a veterinarian, for God's sake. I am also a goddamned fool. I got back to the house that night, and first thing, I dragged the dog out behind the shed. The dog was innocent, I suppose. It was my new wife that brought the brute into our lives. Pitiful yellow eyes, whimpering remorse. The dog crouched low, and I blew its sorry brains out with my hunting rifle. Grief swells until it shrouds the entire universe in gray. Then it shrivels down to its hard black core and buries itself in your heart, where every other beat is a pulse of anguish. With grief comes anger, blame, and remorse. My new wife was a mess. The wounds healed, but Nate's face was puckered by scar tissue into a permanent rictus of surprise, and the shocking angularity of his right shoulder was a constant reminder of horror and loss. I spent a fortune on plastic surgery, which moderated the facial disfigurement so that Nate could move around in public without attracting too much attention. And when Nate was old enough, his prosthetic limb, the training wheel arm, was upgraded to a sleek, robotic carbon fiber contraption that he controlled by twitching the muscles in the shoulder. He was a passable imitation of a teenager, but joy and hope seemed absent. Sports and clubs and friendship too. He spent hours alone in his bedroom. The one-armed boy, her damaged son, Nate's mother, was immobilized by grief, which soon turned to irreversible and ever-deepening depression. She grew thin and weak, listless and atrophied. Her face became an ashen mask. She became a passenger, a burden, useless to me, and she avoided the boy. She couldn't bear the sight of his missing limb. She couldn't bear the daily reminder of her terrible error. Finally, with her maternal and spousal duties fully abandoned, she one day went to collect the mail from the mailbox at the end of the driveway and never returned. Months later, her skeletal remains were found by a road cleaning crew on a quiet stretch of I-95. In her pocket, they found a picture of little Nate, pre-accident, still precious and whole, with his right arm draped over the neck of the dog. Madeline Marks, a comely senior at the high school, invited Nate to the school prom. It was an improbable match, but I was desperate to see Nate achieve a modicum of happiness, independence at least. So I said a little prayer and hoped for the best. Perhaps she was one of those do-good angels who tried to make everyone feel included, or who are blind to disablement. But something felt wrong. The children at Nate's school were relentless bullies, tortured Nate with minor humiliations. My suspicions were substantiated later that night when Nate returned home early, alone, in tears. He was carrying his prosthetic arm like a piece of salvaged wood. It was covered in filth and looked badly damaged. His jacket sleeve was torn. Someone had ripped the prosthetic limb from its exoskeletal shoulder mount. I intercepted Nate, got a slice of the tawdry story out of him before he stormed up to his bedroom and slammed the door. Evil sometimes wears a pretty face. Nasty Maddie, bad girl Maddie. I ask you, as a man, what would you have done? From grief to anger, from anger to vengeance and retribution. We are talking of a short journey. The next day, Maddie's mother phoned and screamed groundless accusations at me. Where was Maddie? What did Nate do to her precious daughter? Nate was a schemer, a druggie, a weirdo, a monster. I was worse. I created the monster. It was true. This was as much my fault as anybody's. As a father, I was a failure. Not that I ever wanted the role. The police arrived with a warrant. They confiscated Nate's computer, and they asked him a lot of questions, which caused the scars on his face and neck to flare up bright crimson with suppressed shame and rage. The police were persistent. This strange-looking boy with the disfigured face and the articulated claw hand was their prime suspect. But Nate knew nothing. Maddie left him and went off with an older boy. She was probably on the lam in Augusta, or Portland. It was a lewd prank to impress a clique of friends. It was a high school hazing, a warped Stephen King dare. Onlookers, teen boys and girls, laughed at Nate as he tried to pull the prosthetic from out of the toilet bowl, where Maddie's boyfriend had jammed it into the trapway. Nobody helped. The police detective, a pit bull man, took notes. A prank would not account for Maddie's absence. Something more sinister had happened to her, he was certain. They'd check Portland, they'd check Augusta. But I could tell, right from the get-go, they were focusing their biased and ignorant investigation exclusively on Nate. The detective even started on me. What was I doing on prom night? Had I seen the girl, Maddie? Had I aided and abetted in a crime? Newspaper reporters were sniffing around, rifling through the trash. A TV station sent a van over and parked outside, looking for an interview with Nate or me. Someone threw a brick through the front window. Someone fired a gun at the garage. Maddie's mother hissed at me like a cat outside the supermarket. Strangers spat at me in the street. My clients canceled appointments, and my staff at the surgery resigned. Maddie's body parts were mostly found strewn about the woods near our house, along the riverbank, and wedged between rocks on the trail behind the nearby transfer station. Maddie's head was impaled on a railing fence near the town pond. With her remains discovered so close to our house, it only intensified the scrutiny. I kept Nate inside, fearing a lynching. Not that he had any interest in going out. Where would he go? What would he do? An itinerant was discovered living in a squalid camp in the woods on the south side of Bald Mountain. A creep, a hermit. His hovel was part hidden by a cave and a clump of gnarled hemlock. And the nearby forest floor was surrounded by scraps of animal fur and bones, grisly, rotting offal. He was a wild man in his 50s who'd been stealing from cabins and campsites, trapping animals in the woods. He'd been living in the woods for perhaps 2 years. A charred piece of Maddie was found in his campfire. Case closed, but not completely. I waited a little while until things had died down a bit, until Nate seemed capable of grasping my concept properly. He seemed slow to understand, then outright confrontational. Nate was repulsed by the idea. What kind of madness was this? His own stepfather? Did I not understand how truly fucking evil this idea was? What had possessed me? What kind of man would do that? It was wrong. It was sick. He wanted nothing to do with it. He would denounce me. I confiscated his phone. He tried to leave the house, and I was forced to fight him to the living room floor, where I subdued him with sprayed triple drip that I used at the surgery to anesthetize livestock. When he came to, He was unyielding. There was no arguing with him. He would not see reason. I explained to him that it was too late anyway. In for a penny, in for a pound. There was no going back now. But eventually, I gave up arguing. Better to seek forgiveness than permission. I dosed him up for surgery. Once Maddie's arm was properly unfrozen, it turned out to be a pretty good match in terms of skin tone and musculature, though perhaps a bit smaller than I would have liked. Her blood type was compatible with Nate's, and the nerve endings and blood vessels were clean and undamaged. It would be a microsurgery marathon, but I was confident that I could perform the operation without any help. Perhaps I was never meant to be a parent. Nate seems to have adjusted reasonably well, though I don't see much of him these days, because it's best to keep him locked in his bedroom. Such rage in one so young, it can't be the arm, because to the casual observer, it looks quite passable, though a bit pale. And I know the operation was a brilliant success, because he recently hurled a can of Coke at me from the far side of his room and nearly knocked me unconscious. So vicious and accurate was the throw. Perhaps the melancholy is hereditary, but perhaps it's that twisted, scarred, and scowling face. Who knows how that might affect a young person? He only has one expression, and I sense that it makes him unfit for an independent life. Nate has one friend, another loner type, a gaming buddy called Jeremy, who'd came around once to help Nate fix his computer. He and Nate had some kind of falling out. It occurs to me that Jeremy has a very passable smile, forever haunted. I know. I have to run, get away, but as yet, haven't the courage. I am in the corner, huddled, naked. I'm more colorful than any clothes I could wear. I'm red, black, purple, and blue. Battered and bruised, my crime inquiring about his whereabouts. Together for 6 years now, our beautiful son asleep upstairs, and I'm not entitled, according to him, to ask him anything. I am not and never will be the boss of him. I'm replaying my actions and conversation over and over again. He's never raised his hand to me before. Verbal abuse, yes. Threats, yes. But never until now, connection physically. I realize this didn't just spring up out of nowhere. For weeks now, it's been building money worries, new baby, never having lived together before. He can't handle it. He can't even handle the thought of being a dad. He acts as if he hates him. I believe he's jealous of him. Maybe it's just a one-off, I tell myself. I wipe my nose, and my hands are covered in snot, tears, and blood. I have to get up. I have got a baby to look after. He can't see me like this. I need to shower. I can wash away the blood, but never will I be able to wash away the shock and fear I felt. He hasn't gone near me since the birth, and last night, with the first punch, his erection appeared. It grew the more he hit me. The names he called me, the force he used. I can't tell my parents. They didn't want me to move in with him in the first place. I'm 19. I had told them, an adult and a new mom with a fella that adores me. I'll be fine. How can I now go back and tell them they were right? It's now 4 months on and middle of summer, and I'm clad in a woolly, oversized sweater which hides a multitude. He's got clever and hits me in places which can be hidden from everyone, but he doesn't hide his beatings from his son. In fact, I think he waits until he's asleep in my lap sometimes to start. He knows I'm more afraid of him hurting him than me. Yesterday, something in me snapped. I'm not taking anymore. My son's not taking it anymore. We both deserve better. In walks the oppressor. I usually sit waiting to suss out his mood before I do anything, but not today. I carry on reading a book. Paul's asleep in his cot, oblivious. He glares at me, walks into the kitchen, and comes storming back. Where's my tea? You know what time I get in at, and my tea and dinner should be already prepared, sitting on the table, waiting for me. Paul and I have already eaten, and since the last time I prepared food, it ended up all over me and the kitchen. I've decided I won't be doing that anymore. His face is incredulous. In any other situation, it would be hilarious, actually. Even now, it's hilarious. I start to giggle and can't stop. Nothing could have stopped it. Have you finally lost the plot? Stupid bitch. What's funny? I stand up and ask him, for once, can we take our fight into a different room and let the baby sleep in peace? I start walking before he gets a chance to respond. He comes in, arm raised, and stops midair as he catches sight of the carving knife in my hand. I slice and only succeed in ripping his shirt. He starts apologizing, the only time since the first time. Tells me he loves me. He'll never hit me again. I can feel my resolve breaking and need to get to my son. I start walking, and he grabs me. The knife clatters to the floor. I knew there and then I was going to pay for this. Big time. He goes in and wakes up. Paul puts the disturbed toddler in his walking chair and hands him the knife. I beg him to take it off him, but he walks over to me and spits in my face. I tell him I'll do anything he wants, that I love him, but just take the knife off the baby. He pushes me on my knees and makes me go on all fours and rapes me while my son gurgles and plays with the knife. Not a scream or whimper do I make, but hum and make soothing noises so Paul won't get alarmed. When he's finished, He gets up and urinates on me and Paul. I've never known such hate, and haven't experienced it on the same level since. When he leaves the next day, I pack up all his stuff and our stuff. I ring my parents and beg them to get me out of there, and plead with them, can I come home? I hear my mother sobbing in the background, and my dad says, darling, we've been dying for this call. It killed us the last time when you asked us to leave and not come back. We'll be there right away. I never told them about the rapes, too ashamed. But the latest beatings were obvious. You only had to look at me. The drive home is terrifying and soothing at the same time. I knew I'd done too much growing up. I could never go back to the girl that lived with Mammy and Daddy again. I wasn't the same girl. He killed himself in a prison cell. I didn't send him there. It was an awful crime committed on someone else. It was a twisted relief, knowing Paul would never have to see him, and a twisted sadness because he'd been my first love, and for a long time I adored him. Time and life move on, scars heal, hope returns. But your past is always your past, and a part of me will be haunted forever. Gardener's World. You've chosen a good time to pay me a visit. I've pulled up some pretty decent leeks this morning. Got some lovely onions in the store, and a rosemary bush that is totally oblivious to all the nonsense that seems to have befallen our world. My garden really has been my savior, my little farm. I can grow what I need and get by very nicely on what my garden supplies. I do wish I'd had a better crop of carrots. I used the finest bone meal fertilizer, but they were a total bust this year. My soil is a little too heavy for them, too much clay. But it's the carrot fly that really did for them. They said our biggest enemy was the sickness. Then they tried to say it was the foreign governments. Then it was all about misinformation and the enemy within. But I survived because I knew all along my only real enemy is carrot fly. When the gas supply was cut off back in '25, I opened up an old fireplace so I could cook on an open flame indoors. Not a pretty job, no power tools, naturally. So, me and Axe had to do most of the heavy work, hacking out the wall they'd used to gag the old hearth. I like it though. The exercise, solving problems, working out a plan to get me to the next crop. Most of the stuff we've lost, I didn't care for anyway. You're lucky today with the weather. It gets too smoky and hot indoors, even with the chimney. No, on a day like this, we cook al fresco. Something lovely about doing my cooking in the place where I get most of my food. I'm a man of nature. That's what I am. You saw my roses on the way in, didn't you? It's the roses and the raspberry canes that bring people to my garden. I took part of the fence down so people can see them more easily, so they can come in and explore. Fancy that. In times like these, someone actually taking part of a good, strong fence down. Well, there's method to my madness. I like to have visitors. Brought you here to me today, didn't it? Relax. Enjoy the sun. Would you like some water? I've got plenty. Since the neighbors have been thinning out, I've been using their houses' guttering, as well as my own, to collect the rain. Been able to grow in their gardens too. That's why I'm doing so well in these tough times. That's why I can afford to lose a few raspberries to curious, hungry bypassers. Waste nothing and work hard. That's me. Do whatever needs to be done. Please, have some water. But how is he going to cook out here, you ask? A very good question. Let me just remove this old tarp. And ta-da! An old enamel bath. Not as common as they once were. But this beautiful old iron roll top was in my neighbor's place. He was a lawyer in the old days. Fat lot of good that did him. Must have cost a fortune. Weighs a ton. I convinced them to help me carry it here in exchange for some food and water. And here we are, those old claw and ball feet holding it up above my fire. An antique bath sitting on my lawn in the shade of my willow. Heaven, you look a bit concerned. Don't worry about the staining on the sides of the bath. That's inevitable when you cook with direct heat like this. It looks dirty, but it's not. It's just well seasoned from all the grease and juices. I'll just get this fire lit. Thank you for gathering all of this wood, by the way. Told you I'd trade you for water and the raspberries, didn't I? I'm a man of my word. We'll need a couple of buckets of water for the tub. And what else? I think today we'll have a couple of these leeks. No carrots, though. Curse you, carrot fly. And I think we'll have a big, dirty handful of the fresher stems from my gnarly old rosemary bush. Don't worry, the heat will kill the germs. I'll use some of this too. Take a look. It's a pot of fat. My grandma would have called it dripping. You must keep this stuff. It's more valuable than gold, literally, these days. I preserve it whenever I cook. It's full of calories and protein and goodness. It keeps for ages. I've got a cupboard full of it. This is from the last few rabbits I cooked. It's a bit of a cocktail, to be honest. Rabbits, rats, squirrels, street rats, raspberry thieves. Only joking, they weren't thieves. You're not a thief. I can spare a few raspberries. I'm going to get this beautiful stuff, nice and hot, and then get the leeks in there. Then the water and the rosemary. Axe, get over here, you big lump. He looks brutal, but I keep him sharp enough to chop the leeks. Look, He's bright as a sushi knife. I can use him to shave. Look close. There now. A slice of leek you can see through. That will just melt in the fat. My mouth is watering. Did you hear that? I love that sound, that sizzle. The popping twigs under the bath. The first chunk of leek sliding around in there, in all that greasy goodness, hissing and cackling. The sun weeping through the old willow. No more horrible planes overhead. No traffic. No more reports about all the doom and gloom. No more sirens. Just a sizzle and a pop, and the waft of home cooking on the late summer breeze. Potatoes. How could I forget potatoes? I sometimes think I'm losing my mind. Not many of this year's crop left, but this is the best way to use them. They add body. Oh, that was unintentional, sorry. Please don't be upset. Poor taste has no place in my garden. Well, I must say, it's been nice to have someone to talk to other than Axe. It has been a while. The raspberries will be dying off soon, and the roses won't last for much longer after that. I suspect I'll be getting fewer visitors, but never mind. I'm going to have plenty of provisions to keep me strong over the winter. And there's still blackberries out, so you never know. I'll be fine in the house, sleeping in the cellar with Axe. Anyway, looks like we've got a rolling boil going here. So sorry, but it's bath time. Stay quiet, friend. Lila sank into the couch, the flickering glow of the TV screen illuminating the shadows that loomed the darkened room. She had chosen a silly rom-com, hoping to distract herself. But the air felt thick, almost suffocating. Every creak of the old house made her jump, and the shadows in the corners seemed to whisper her name in a language she couldn't understand. It was late, and her roommate Clara was working on her thesis upstairs. But Lila couldn't shake the feeling that they weren't the only ones in the home. An uneasy tension coiled in her stomach, forcing her to triple check behind each door, under the couch, and even peered behind the shoe rack, half expecting to find something or someone hiding within. She ducked below the kitchen counters, her fingers feeling for a butcher's knife. Her heart sank when she felt the empty spot in the knife rack. It was missing. The chill creeping up her spine told her that whatever was happening was more than just her imagination. She glanced toward the back door, where the moonlight shimmered through the glass panes, casting eerie reflections that danced on the walls. A sudden gust of wind rattled the bay window, sending a shiver through her. Something was off. With a tentative step, she approached the back door, feeling the cold metal handle beneath her palm. The moment she unlocked it, her phone buzzed on the coffee table. The sound startled her, and she snatched it up, her pulse quickening at the sight of Clara's name. "Did you hear that?" the message read. A cold dread settled over her, crawling beneath her skin as the unease that had settled over her intensified. What could Clara possibly be hearing? She typed back, "Hear what?" but hesitated, glancing down the hallway that led to the stairs. The dim light from the TV cast erratic shadows that flickered and danced. And for a fleeting moment, Lila thought she saw something move behind the curtains. Her breath hitched, a primal instinct warning her that she was not alone. Maybe it was just the movie messing with her mind, but the feeling of being watched pressed heavier on her chest. Another message chimed in. "I think someone's outside." Panic surged through Lila's veins, prickling her skin. She stood frozen for a moment, weighing her options. Should she check the back door or run upstairs to her roommate? Clara's words echoed in her mind. Why would she think someone was outside? How could she guess that? Why is she being so casual about it? "Are you sure?" Lila typed back, her fingers trembling. "Just stay quiet," Clara replied. "I'll call you when I'm sure." A shiver ran down Lila's spine. Her instincts screamed at her to call the police, but fear held her in place. The silence grew oppressive, and she could hear the faint sound of something dragging from above. Without thinking, she moved to the back door, her heartbeat thundering in her ears. As she reached for the handle, a scream erupted from upstairs, a raw, piercing wail that silenced the night. It was Clara's voice. Adrenaline propelled Lila forward as she bolted toward the staircase, her heart hammering in her chest. "Clara!" she yelled, bounding up the steps 2 at a time. The hallway stretched out before her, dark and foreboding, thick with an air of dread. "Clara!" she shouted again, panic clawing at her throat. The scream had stopped, replaced by an eerie silence that felt like a warning. When she reached Clara's door, her hand trembled as she tried to push it open. It was locked. Why was it locked? Lila fumbled for her spare key, forcing the door open. The room was empty, save for the dim glow of Clara's laptop on the desk. Papers were strewn about, books toppled over, and the window was wide open, allowing a chilling breeze to sweep through the room. Lila stepped inside, her heart racing. "Clara," Lila called softly, her voice just above a whisper. "Where are you?" Suddenly, she heard a soft rustling from the bathroom. Her breath caught, and fear settled like a stone in her stomach as she approached, each step feeling heavier than the last. She reached for the door, her mind racing with images of Clara being attacked. She hesitated, her hand hovering over the handle, glancing back at the open window that seemed to beckon her to escape. Then her phone buzzed again, illuminating the screen with another message from her roommate. "Don't come in." Lila's heart sank. and a sense of dread washed over her. The message was sent from Clara's phone, but something felt wrong. "Are you okay?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. The rustling from the bathroom stopped abruptly, replaced by a suffocating silence that wrapped around her like a shroud. Lila took a step back, cold sweat prickling her skin. She felt trapped. Her instincts screamed at her to run, but she couldn't leave Clara. With trembling hands, she yanked open the bathroom door. Clara stood there, her eyes went and wild, blood staining her nightgown, the crimson liquid soaking into her hair like a macabre halo. In the bathtub, a body lay motionless, limbs grotesquely scattered like a puzzle, arms and legs discarded beside the sink. The young woman's lifeless eyes stared vacantly at the ceiling, unseeing. Lila could barely make out the limb hanging from Clara's hand, for in the other was a knife, glistening in the remnants of her victim. Lila froze, her mouth dry and her mind reeling. The air thickened with a metallic tang, and she could feel her lungs begging for air. "Clara," her voice cracked, trembling as violently as her body was. "What have you done?" Clara slowly turned her head, a strange, twisted smile creeping across her lips, glistening with the blood that stained her face. "You said you didn't hear anything," she said, her voice cold and deliberate. "You lied." "I didn't," Lila began, only to be cut off. "You lied," Clara repeated, her tone sharp, cutting through the air like the blade in her hand. "You need to stay quiet, friend, and I'll make sure you never lie again." The door behind Lila slammed shut, sealing her inside the suffocating darkness. Fear surged through her as Clara advanced, the knife glinting ominously in the dim light. "Clara, please." Lila's plea faded into a whimper, the weight of impending dread crushing her. Without warning, Clara lunged forward, the blade slicing through the air with a cruel precision. Pain exploded in Lila's mouth, and she gasped, trying to scream, but the sound was swallowed by the metallic taste of blood. As Clara withdrew the knife, Lila felt a sudden emptiness. Her tongue, her voice, her very essence slipped from her mouth and fell to the floor with a sickening thud. Clara's eyes gleamed with a wild delight as she leaned closer, whispering words that curled around Lila's mind like smoke. "Now you'll stay quiet," Clara said, her voice low and dripping with satisfaction. "No more lies, no more lies." The door behind Lila slammed shut, the weight of darkness closing in, silencing her voice and sealing her fate. "Take me." I no longer wanted to live my life, but neither did I wish to die. So I resisted the temptation of the eternal abyss, knowing that any afterlife would hold no consolation. in effect, choosing a living death, achieved by numbing my senses against the world and disappearing within. By day, it was books, movies, video games, anything to place my mind in the body of another, transporting my consciousness to a plane where there were strict rules and the main character always triumphed, as opposed to the uncertainty of my own existence. Rarely did I surface from fantasy, and only when my body demanded it absolutely necessary. The sun never graced my flesh, and the air of my sealed chamber weighed heavy with my own musk. I was a fully grown woman, living as a teenage boy, and I didn't care. By night, it was a chemical affair. Amber spirit of any form or flavor would achieve my goal, as long as it was served with ice in its heart. Taste was a luxury I could ill afford, not after losing my career to sheer apathy. It no longer seemed of any import whether digital numbers fell in line with invented targets. The whole world operated on an imaginary system of credit that existed only because we said it did. Anything outside of a practical vocation for which I no longer had time or patience to learn felt like playing pretend and a waste of life. My usual haunt was a quiet dive bar at the end of my city block. Its proximity, the only deciding factor, limiting the expedition home to a straight line stumble. That night, I spent as any other, nursing a tumbler and examining the slow melt of the frozen shards it protected. "Time for one last round, sweetheart?" Frank asked, ducking his head into my line of sight. He was a kind soul. Despite the tattoo-covered biceps, large enough to toss me out like a rag doll, he always let me brood in peace. Watching my back and moving on any would-be suitors, the apparent ruffian doted on me with a brotherly worry. He never denied my cash, though. While busy at weekends, the quiet, dead-end joint couldn't afford to turn away drunks the rest of its working days. I felt at times to be single-handedly paying the poor guy's wage. "Always," I answered, offering up my low-tide glass and a half-hearted smile. As he poured, I glanced across the room. There were a few men in suits, clearly avoiding their homes and wives. A couple of tourists just looking for a warm place to rest, and a scattering of solitary older women. They, like me, I assumed, had nowhere else to go, no one to return to, and nothing to live for, aside from the never-ending goal of forgetting. I'd had it all. Not so long ago, I had been lucky enough to know love and comfort. However, my good fortune was stolen away by one solitary word, printed in black ink on a medical chart. That word had ripped my future away and burned it to ash for good measure, leaving me here in my perpetual endeavor to avoid my own existence, holed up at the corner booth. He was there. As always, my constant, silent drinking buddy. Every night, he arrived like clockwork in a pressed black shirt and pants with shining black boots. His midnight wardrobe offset only by the pale ivory of his skin and the crimson of his lips. Ordering a single jar of bourbon, which would never grace his tongue, there he stoically remained, silently surveying the room. I had never even seen him rise to use the bathroom. How he managed to leave several times a week with a different conquest on his arm, I had no idea. Girl or guy, it didn't seem to matter to him. They just flocked to his side, like magnets being drawn together. With only a look, he seemed to seduce a target with an hour or less of minimal effort. He then escorted them out the door for what I only assumed to be a night of intense pleasure. He was certainly handsome in a clean-cut way, but he had never directed his gaze at me or any of the other regulars. It was always the passing through that succumbed. Alaric was his name, according to Frank. In spite of his blatant philandering, I couldn't help but imagine he treated his prey with more humanity that I had been dealt by the man I once loved. That cursed filth had proclaimed to love me. The putrid liar had promised me protection. The venomous snake had abandoned me at my most vulnerable. One word was all it took to break our bond, shatter his oath completely. One printed word, voiced in clinical monotone under fluorescent lights. The word that tore my future to shreds and sent my beloved in search of a more suitable mate, infertile. I had been told I was still grieving, and knew it to be true. My depression, spiced with anger, told a traditional tale. What I considered a lie was that it would end in an accepted peace. How could it, when my natural immortality had been ripped away? Any harmony I would have found in life would have risen from knowing my memory, and soul would have persisted through the generations that came after me. Anecdotes told of my character to grandchildren and onward, keeping me alive in thought, my name on a branch of an ever-expanding tree. Instead, there would be no furthering of my story. It would end when I did. So why not just get it over with? Any experiences gained would be lost to time anyway. So why bother? Why expend all that energy on impermanence? I should have just ended the torment that day, when my forehead had been stamped with pointless. There were only 2 reasons I held back from instigating the end. One was the fear that any afterlife would be purposed with watching over loved ones, for which I had none. So it would tally that I would be no better off than I was now. The other was Alaric, and the solution I had begun to suspect he could offer me. My quest to lose myself in various media had educated me thoroughly in the ways of the vampire, the desperate young girl in need of connection, an outcast from the society surrounding her. Ill-fitting in the living world, she would always come across a creature of the night who would welcome her into his ranks, usually with sultry and salacious single-mindedness. Alas, if Alaric was what I suspected him to be, he ignored me, perhaps because my clouded mind was reaching for a fantasy solution to a real-life problem. Most likely, he was only a strange-looking man with a talent for seduction. Regardless, I couldn't shake the idea. Too many aspects of his regular attendance pointed to the supernatural. If I was wrong, all I would achieve was appearing like the drunk I had become, which was small consequence to risk being proven right. "Good evening, Alaric," I slurred, and slid onto the red velvet bench beside him. "Do I know you?" he asked in a soft English accent. His slow and steady speech belayed a calm in direct contrast to my harsh American. "Not officially, but I've sat at that bar every night for several weeks, watching you. So I believe I know you very well." "Oh?" he asked, waiting for me to fill the space. "I know what you are," I whispered, in the way that inebriated people do when they believe themselves subtle. "And what is that?" he said, smiling as if humoring a toddler. The feeling of being infantilized by a look sent waves of submission through me. It made me feel safe under his powerful gaze, willing to surrender control into his adept hands. Returning to a childlike state would allow me to release the expectations I had placed on myself to assume parenthood, which only solidified my resolve to follow my intended course of action. "Vampire," I blurted. I did not want to drag this out into a feature film of suspect and intrigue. I wanted my answer and solution that night. The sooner, the better. His reaction was as expected, a hearty laugh, but one that did not convince his eyes that my accusation was truly funny. "Does such a thing exist?" he asked of me. I did not believe so until I happened upon you. I see you taking victims, always transients who never return. You never drink, never eat, never use the bathroom. You are pale, intense, clothed in black, and I have only ever seen you at night. "Perhaps I am simply peculiar," he offered. "Perhaps." I nodded. "I think it worth looking the fool to discover the truth." He responded, never breaking his eye contact, his intense stare examining every facet of me via the portal of my irises. It felt as though he flayed me from the outside until his scrutiny fell upon my vulnerable soul. I now understood how he seduced so many, so quickly. "I wish you to turn me," I said, interrupting his gaze before I fell completely at his feet. My life has lost all meaning with the living, and I would greet death but for the fear of further loneliness. I see a single solution for one who would not live but does not wish to die. So please, take me with you into immortality. Follow me, he said, and rose, striding to the doors, without looking back to see if I followed. He must have been as certain as I was that I would. Ignoring a disapproving look from Frank, I made my way across the room to the exit. I pursued my immediate master out of the bar and through dark alleys that all smelled of refuse and rats. Stumbling to remain on his heels, I signaled my deference like a dog called to attend. He stopped suddenly, turning and reaching a strong arm around my waist, and in one motion, pressing me against the scorched wall of a building. Dumpsters, boxes, and crates now blocked my view of anything but him. You would submit to your impulse? He asked, his lips pressed to my ear and his hand against my chest, pinning me in place against the cold bricks. I could feel his heavy breaths quickening in lust, his hand quivering where it rested between my breasts. Whether it was from desire for my blood or body, I still did not know. The chance of stretching my living death into infinity was worth giving him either. You would succumb to my will? He asked again. Break from this life and join me in whatever comes next? Yes! I screamed in ecstasy, feeling excitement and promise for the first time since that word had plunged me into darkness. Take me, please. Take me away from this temporary world. Sudden pain and cold followed. His dead cheeks pressing against my neck and his teeth puncturing my jugular. My warm blood mixed with his icy touch, like boiling soup spilt on a snowy mountain. I closed my eyes and writhed in anticipation of the immortality I sought. Eventually, he pulled back. The world swam and swirled as my head felt as but a feather. I saw his chin stained brown with my dried blood. How long had I given myself to this creature? The low light of the alley weighed down on my senses. The rotten smell of the trash bags assaulted, and without his hard body pressed against mine, I felt exposed. Will it happen now? I managed to mutter through the disorientation, my eyes rolling and unable to focus on his beautiful face. Will you die? Yes. Will you turn? I doubt it, he said, sneering down at me. Somehow he had grown tall, or I had fallen. I did not know which was more real. I am a predator, not some romanticized, dangerous lover to be tamed, as this age loves to depict. You are nothing but prey. I have no desire to intentionally turn game, as I am sure you would not share your bed with a cow. He spun on his heels and stalked into the night. With no further words or explanation, I was alone, crumpled amongst the filth, dying in the dark. I had not the energy to fear, only regret the trust I had placed in a monster I had not understood. As my eyelids grew heavier and the cold seeped deeper, I began to long for those temporary years, the moments I was so willing to throw away, for all the time I could have had for myself, the experiences I could have taken as my own without concern of their lasting, for the lives I could have affected, but now never would. Perhaps the next plane would offer more than I had imagined. I did not intend to waste the chance again. If it did, I closed my eyes and waited for whatever would come next, accepting in peace that I had ushered in my own end by ungratefully reaching for more than I had been gifted. The guinea pigs. Dr. Travers ticked all the boxes on my consent form, and peering over his glasses, assured me an arm transplant was standard practice. I perform 10 a day, he said, handing me the paperwork. They're a piece of cake. Really? For sure, he said, indicating where to sign. It's just brain surgery that gives me a headache. Stella. The anesthetist rolled her eyes, sighed, and asked if I'd any allergies. None, I replied, scanning the small print. That's just perfect, she said, clearing her throat. Would you prefer gas and air, or the full works? What's the norm? I said, catching her eye. That depends, she smiled. Are you squeamish? Chauza. When I signed up for military service 5 years ago, I'd selected the BAGS health insurance option. Biologically Accelerated Growth Systems, or BAGS, for short, was a third-party company pioneering an experimental limb replacement scheme. The government initiated the idea, and the Ministry of Defense embraced the concept to counteract the ongoing threat of IEDs. In the event of a severe injury or amputation, they promised us rapid treatment and substitute limbs. All they required from volunteers were 2 pints of blood and sufficient genetic material to cultivate a trauma clone in their body farm. It made sense, and I had nothing to lose, hopefully. I have to admit that the lure of the extra pay motivated me when I signed the forms. Any potential injuries gained in active combat were far from my mind, and further complications seemed a remote possibility. It was during the 6 months of basic training I discovered no else had enrolled for the BAGS insurance policy. Perhaps everyone reckoned the scheme was just a gimmick. Maybe I'd misread the caveat on the consent form about transplanting living tissue. I mean, it never occurred to me I'd meet the limb donor face to face. Tutua, my last tour of duty, occurred in April 2015. Around the time jihadist fighters released a video of the ancient city of Nimrud erupting in a cloud of dust and smoke. They attacked its priceless sculptures and frescoes with sledgehammers and power tools, then detonated the 3,000-year-old Assyrian ruins. The wanton demolition came amidst a wave of attacks on Allied forces in Iraq. I lost my left forearm in Nasiriyah, about 360 clicks south-southeast of Baghdad, near the ruins of the ancient city of Ur. Sergeant Albury snagged his boot tip on a tripwire and didn't stand a chance. He was toast in an instant, poor sod. I was next in line, and the landmine's devastating blast threw me across the street. So much for the cradle of civilization. There was little below my left shoulder when I regained consciousness in the field hospital's ICU. The duty surgeon said I was under the knife for 10 hours and told me I was lucky to be alive. He expected a full recovery, having extracted a bucket of the shrapnel from my vital organs, although he expected roving fragments to surface over time. If you have any further issues, he said, picking his teeth, I'm sure your regiment's medics will sort you out. Yeah, right, I thought. But you know what? He wasn't wrong. A serious-minded BAGS employee in an expensive suit attended my bedside the following day and explained the benefits of my policy. He presented a convincing case for urgent action and applied for a consultation on my return to base. I waited 6 weeks for an appointment to discuss my suitability for a limb transplant. Dr. Travers was frank. Either he operated forthwith, or I faced an interminable desk job back at HQ and no more active duty. Are there any risks? I asked. The odds of rejection are slim, he said, frowning. But better than your career prospects as a shorthand typist. Point taken, I said, considering my disadvantage. Dr. Travers glossed over the matter of sourcing and matching a spare limb. It's not all about physical compatibility, he said. There's the psychological aspect to consider. I recall biting my lip when he explained a typical post-op response. It'll be disconcerting and may feel as if it doesn't belong to you, he said. However, just remember, an unfamiliar appendage is far better than the alternative. I'd no time to worry about the details because my allotted day in the operating theater happened within 48 hours. I didn't sleep the night before and entered the theater feeling lightheaded, having followed the nil-by-mouth instruction beforehand. Stella performed her last checks before a nurse handed me a surgical gown, and Dr. Travers scrubbed his hands while we waited for the trauma clone. The freezing cold hiatus on my back in the theater, wearing only a starched cotton gown, was the longest hour of my life. I was covered in goosebumps and shivering from a cold sweat when a masked nurse poked a gurney through the theater's swing doors. She appeared without a drum roll or fanfare, as if she was shoving a burdensome shopping trolley out of a supermarket. The nurse halted parallel to my surgical table, kicked down the brakes, and whipped off the thin sheet to reveal my doppelganger's naked body. It was wired up to a cluster of electrical body monitor pads and strapped down to the metal bed with sturdy leather belts. The left arm sported thick red pre-surgery symbols that looked like a gang member's colors and hanged loose and lifeless above the linoleum. He lay motionless beside me, staring past a bloated plasma bag that dangled aloft and fed blood to an intravenous cannula. Dr. Travers raised his arms and cracked his knuckles and nodded at Stella. She wasted no time and administered a heavy dose of propofol. I remember her asking me to count down from 10, but don't recall getting past 7. When I regained consciousness, my body double was still next to me, an exact copy, except now the left arm was missing, and there was a sutured wound below the shoulder. His eyelids were closed and motionless, except for an occasional REM flutter, and his chest rose and fell in even-paced undulations, as if operated by mechanized bellows. On closer inspection, the trauma clone was nothing like me. There were neither scars and stretch marks, nor any signs of life's long-term damage. The left arm I'd received was similar in size and shape to my original. I mean, I thanked God for my replacement, despite needing months of gym work to strengthen it. Yes, size-wise, it was a splendid match, and Dr. Travers had done a remarkable job. It's just that, well, I don't know. I guess I'll miss that barbed wire tattoo circling my forearm, and all my ginger freckles too. My ex-wife used to love those silly brown spots. Nobody's perfect, she'd say. If only she knew she could see me now. The adoption process takes time, Dr. Travers said during our meeting a week later. You ought to be home soon, and you'll adjust in a few weeks. Will it ever feel like mine? I said, flexing my stiff new fingers. Of course, he said, cleaning his spectacles. Besides, I'm only a phone call away if you need reassurance. Dr. Travers couldn't guarantee the pairing process would work, and I had to be prepared for rejection. He outlined likely symptoms in case the donor's hand didn't marry up with my nervous system. It was a long month in the BAGS Institute while I acclimated to my new limb. I followed the physio's guidelines for recovery and adhered to her plan, exercising as much as possible. The Institute's layout was straightforward. The building supported 8 levels, and most floors contained glass-partitioned offices. As far as I knew, the first floor contained the surgical theater and recovery wards, and the windowless ground floor housed the gym, storage units, and a boiler room. My first floor ward was empty, and I was alone most days, apart from Nurse Winter's morning welfare visits and meal deliveries, and Dr. Travers' weekly progress checks. I seldom encountered any other members of staff on any of the 8 floors, and met nobody in the gym, pool, or sauna facilities. Apart from intermittent security patrols, there were only a couple of employees engaged in gardening and exterior maintenance work. It was on my last day that we had a power cut, and the building lost its heat and lighting. I was exiting the gym at the time, cast into darkness by the occurrence, and strayed down an unfamiliar corridor. It was about 10 minutes before the green overhead emergency lights kicked in, by which time I found myself in one of the storage units. Somehow, I'd bypassed the security system in the outage and found myself lost in a maze of boxes, sealed containers, and cargo bays. I admit being disorientated by the experience. However, a sudden thought occurred. Until that moment, I'd never considered my trauma clone's whereabouts. Where was he? And what condition was he in? Was there accommodation here? Dr. Travers had led me to believe the Institute looked after and supported my trauma clone. So, why had he forbidden me to talk to him or make contact? I was pondering these questions as I meandered down a gentle sloped vehicle access ramp into the basement. As soon as I entered the lower corridors, I heard a low, stuttering hum of clicks and splutters. I thought it was a chattering mechanical turbine spluttering to life. I was wrong. The noise had an organic quality and enveloped me in slow pulses, like surf dissolving between fractured seashells on a distant shore. I stumbled onwards in the pale amber glow until I could advance no further. The light was emanating from translucent ceiling panels within a glass-walled room. Below it stood motionless figures connected to an upper gantry by a complicated loom of feeding tubes and electrical sensor cables. Life support systems, I imagined. The figures all shared similar characteristics, but differed somewhat in musculature, as if they were cuttings taken from a parent and propagated at staggered intervals. They were all naked and standing in equally spaced rows and columns, like life-sized chess pieces, awaiting a call to arms. There were at least 20 of them, all staring ahead with uncomprehending, glazed eyes and indifferent expressions. The wretched creatures were like a herd of cattle grazing in a pasture, oblivious to time and tide, and at the mercy of unknown assailants. I advanced towards the glass wall, and the closest figure's head turned to face me. It was obvious from his missing limb and sutured shoulder that we'd met before. There was a spark of recognition in those dilated pupils, like a dim, flickering light from a dying star. He edged forward as far as his tethers would allow, and raised his right arm in painful increments. All the while, those black pools of artificial existence held their intense, unflinching gaze. His fingertips reached to their full extent, like an unfurling leaf, and stroked the surface of the glass between us. I placed my left hand on the transparent surface and spread my fingers. Without so much as a blink, he mimicked my gesture. Our raised palms mirrored each other, either side of the shatterproof glazing. My hand flinched, as if gripped by its rightful owner, or some vestigial impulse dictated its movement. I hesitated for more than a minute as it twitched and writhed of its own accord. I lowered my eyes, tearing myself from his pitiable stare. 15 millimeters separated us, and yet we were worlds apart, as if we were distant relatives meeting in some parallel universe. I imagined some warmth in his palm and supposed his instinctive gesture was meant to keep me there. He turned away and returned to his designated position amongst all my other clones. They were all looking at me now. My back spasmed with an intense, muscular shiver, as if I'd felt an icy blast. It was impossible to remain there with all those pairs of eyes judging me. I rubbed my hands together for warmth as I walked away, and I realized my clone wasn't born. He was created. He hadn't emerged from nature. The Institute reared and propagated him from cells which they'd nurtured to a mature specimen. That notion should have consoled me, but it didn't. Dr. Travers was adamant. The trauma clone didn't have a life as such. No family, no memories, and no real concept of a world outside. That was how he told me to frame the situation. "You're lucky," he said. "Not everyone has a chance to replace all their vital organs." I felt sick, looking down at my left arm afterwards, and recalled that awful stump on my doppelganger. Now, I'd encountered him in person. It felt as if I'd been caught red-handed, receiving stolen goods, and by chance met the lawful owner. "Don't worry about it," Dr. Travers said, placating my concerns. I couldn't be at peace with the notion, but I accepted he was right. How else could I live with myself, knowing that the trauma clone's only function was to donate spare parts? There was a guard of honor as I departed that evening, and I wondered what would happen if my trauma clone escaped. Would he survive in the outside world, or just succumb to nature's mercy, like a domesticated pet that's lost its natural instincts? As I walked across the deserted compound to my vehicle, I couldn't imagine returning here unless the worst happened. I supposed I'd only meet my trauma clone again if I was unlucky during my next tour in the Middle East. But who knows? They hadn't patched me up to stare at a PC all day in the morning light. The earlier days of the apocalypse was only chaos. Death and smoke gripped the air. I could feel it stale all around me. It coated my skin, my clothes, my hair. Fear pulsed through every vein. Terror gripped every muscle. Dread gnawed every brain. It was melted into the eyes of everyone you passed. When would it happen to me? When will I watch it happen to someone I love? What could we have done differently? Thoughts that would plague my mind. Over and over, my new reality. The dead no longer stayed dead, and those bitten became deranged, unreachable. They would rip out their hair, scream into the night, pick the skin off their bones until they would be covered in dark, bloody scabs that never seemed to heal. The worst was when they came for you, their eyes empty pits as they chased after you with never-ending endurance and unnatural speed. Nothing like seeing a crippled old woman hit by a truck going 40 mph, only to rise again unfazed, keeping pace with a teenager as she drags her mangled foot behind her. The only advantage left was the inability to use their brains. They couldn't climb ladders or trees. They couldn't open doors or sneak through windows. And in this world, we had to use every advantage we could get. In those early days, everyone still held on to their humanity. The memories of their old life still fresh. I remember thinking that things may eventually go back to normal. Eventually, where my biggest problem was maybe forgetting my lunch at home, or something as juvenile as what to wear to my meeting. However, everything this new world touched was tainted. Cities burned, homes abandoned, our population destroyed, leaving only a handful of us left. Fortunate would not a word I would use for the survivors. What I was fortunate for, however, was the group I had found a few months prior. They were mostly good people in present standards. We didn't rob from the living. We didn't murder the innocent or strike down the weak. We took care of one another and watched each other's back. Everyone pulled their weight, from going on supply runs, to working the garden, to gathering firewood. The group consisted of 15 of us who camped deep in a national forest near Colorado Springs. The supply runs were little more than a day's trip, and our traveling group consisted of 3 people always. I would go as often as I could, preferring to stay on the move to keep my shifting thoughts at bay. We always played it safe and quiet, successfully making it 5 months without losing a member. This should have brought me an ounce of comfort, that it has been a while since we lost someone, so it must mean we were getting wiser. Although all I could think to count on was luck, and any day that luck would eventually run out and disaster would strike. We were camped out in some loft apartments bordering the forest. Paul was on watch duty, while Libby slept on the couch adjacent to mine. I remember falling asleep with blankets wrapped around me that reminded me of a moldy scent that used to cling to clothes that were left in the washer longer than they should have been. It used to bother me using strangers' belongings like their clothes or blankets, especially when the entire place still smelled of old cigar smoke. However, I came to be grateful for the comfort of being in a semi-safe, warm spot for the night. I woke with a jerk, jarring myself out of my typical, reoccurring nightmare. Sweat forced my dark hair to cling to my forehead. Panting, I mindlessly reached for the weapon beside me. My hands found only a butcher knife I snagged from the kitchen before falling to sleep. Remembering I had given Paul my handgun for his rotation of watch, since it was less bulky than the shotgun he often slugged around, I tried to calm my racing heart, but something had just felt wrong. I looked over, seeing Libby's still sleeping form. I started to stand, wondering how long I had been asleep. Surely Paul was well past his shift. I reached the window, pulling back the blinds to find gray light pouring through the opening. My heart sank. Paul was supposed to wake me hours ago. I didn't see him anywhere in the still, dark living room. I silently walked over to Libby and gave her a gentle shake before stepping back, knowing she slept with a knife under her pillow. She sat up with a gasp, her blonde hair frizzing out from her worn braid. Something is wrong. Paul should have woken me hours ago. She stared at me blankly, my words taking a few seconds longer to comprehend as she shook sleep from her mind. "Where is he?" she asked, blinking vigorously. Her green eyes roamed the shadows of the living room. I had liked Libby from the moment I met her. A few months prior, she had found us on her own, days after losing her partner to a minor infection that would have only required a throughout cleaning and maybe a few antibiotic before the outbreak. I've never asked, but she couldn't be much younger than me, her youth apparent in her round cheeks. Paul, on the other hand, was well older than us bother. He looked closer to my father's age, gray hairs dusting his hair and reaching down into his beard. It was out of character for him to wander off on his own. We survived by following strict rules that I know that he knew, because I had gone on more runs with Paul than anyone else in the group. "I'm not sure. Help me look around?" She nodded and tossed her blanket to the side, wobbling a bit as she stood. Once we were sure that he was nowhere inside, my cold panic really did begin to take hold. We quickly gathered our limited supplies. I carried Paul's shotgun and bag with mine, thankful that he had always packed light. Outside, the light from the sun began to coat everything in a golden hue. The chilled, damp air hung from everything from the night before. I moved as silently as I could, keeping my eyes peeled for any sign of Paul. It was mornings like this that seemed to deceive you and hide the horrors of the world we lived in. I would have loved a day like this, before the outbreak. The birds chirping, the air smelling of fresh pine, the clouds peacefully drifting through the sky. If only a heavy sense of dread didn't cling around me, throat like a noose. I rounded the corner of one of the buildings, with Libby close behind. Before me stretched a courtyard. A few trees stretched tall, casting long shadows. The trees were surrounded by a few dry patches of grass and shrubs. I had to shift my head a bit to the right, but I saw him standing there, maybe 50 feet away. His name was on the tip of my tongue. It was nearly out of my mouth in a whisper before something slammed my jaw shut. The way he stood gave me pause. His neck seemed to hang from his shoulders. The way he stood, his arms dangling empty at his sides, unmoving. I began to reach out to stop Libby, but before I could, she slammed into me. The knife she gripped in her hand clanged loudly through the still air into the shotgun strapped to my back. The breath in my lungs left me like someone had just punched me in the stomach. I looked to where Paul stood, horror clogged in my throat, as his head whipped towards us. What had happened next came in a blur. Minutes passed in seconds, my body numb as my instinct took control of my muscles. I grabbed Libby's arm and began to sprint as fast as I could. We ran across a street, hearing Paul's footfalls quickly gaining on us. I refused to turn around. I didn't trust blindly running into one of dark doorways that could hold any number of threats. Instead, my eyes scanned for anything we could climb. Relief spread over me as I spotted a ladder that hung from one of the buildings. I urged Libby ahead of me, letting her climb the ladder first as I turned, planting my feet. I raised the rifle, cocking it back before aiming it at Paul's head. I fired before my fear could choke me. His nearness unsettled me. He dropped hard to the ground, unmoving and lifeless, his body skidding against the pavement, twisting unnaturally as it landed. I turned, climbing the ladder after Libby. My mind played over what I saw before the bullet ripped through Paul. In a flash, I saw blood that coated Paul's throat, but not from a bite. It looked more like a slash from a blade. I tried to focus on the placement of my hands on the rungs of the ladder, but my mind buzzed. Finally reaching the top, I froze, overlooking onto the roof, where Libby stood motionless. Before her stood a man. His hands reached out before him, as if he were trying to calm a spooked animal. Without thought, I pointed the rifle directly at him. Below me, I was faintly aware of the infected down below, gathering at the base of the ladder. Their frenzies, gargled sounds, reaching my ears. However, all my focus was on the man on the roof. His attention turned to me And in that instance, shock radiated through me. I knew this man. I recognized his dark brown eyes from another lifetime ago, when his eyes didn't hold circles, bags, and his skin seemed to hang from his bones. He had worked in my department. For years we had walked the same halls and attended the same meetings. His name formed on my mouth without though as I slowly lowered the rifle. Jesse? His eyes widened at the sound of his name. He lowered his arms. He looked different, almost unrecognizable, as he stared back at me. Libby and I joined him on the roof. Libby silently sat, staring blankly ahead towards the slow-moving clouds. I, however, stood with Jesse, staring over towards the small town that was now crawling with infected, their screams and snarls echoing through the streets below. "Bad call, firing the rifle," Jesse said. His word came out a harsh whisper. His tone disturbed me. No person was the same after the outbreak, but something about Jesse seemed off. Hysteria seemed to have set into his once warm eyes. His jerky movements made me feel as if he was close to the edge of insanity. This man was not the one I had known in my life prior. I wanted to take Libby and leave as soon as I could, but the streets below were unsafe. I tried to calm my nerves and talk soothingly to the man, giving no indications to my fear other than the bullet already loaded into the chamber. I know I regret it now, but I just wanted to give us enough time to reach the ladder. His hand twitched at his side. "Well, look what you did." He angrily pointed at the street below. When he moved his arm, my gaze drifted to his hip, where a gun poked from waistband. I had noticed it before, however. Now I could see it now in detail. I inhaled a sharp breath as realization soaked in. I grabbed the shotgun, slowly, bringing it around to my front. The motion caused his head to snap in my direction. "Where did you get that gun?" I asked, my voice coming out shaky. Anger twisted his face as he grabbed it the same second I took aim with the rifle. Libby stood swiftly at the quick change of our position. The gun he held was my gun, the one that I had given to Paul the night prior. "I found it," Jesse said, his voice coming out in a snarl. The image of Paul running towards me replayed in my mind. His throat slit. "You killed Paul," I said, bothered by how my voice quivered. Jesse shook his head hard, as if he were trying to shake a thought out of his head. His arm twitched again. Nausea rolled up my throat, terrified of this crazed man before me. His face kept twitching, and he jerked again, using his free hand to wipe the sweat from his forehead. I have seen my share of evil men in this world, but something about Jesse was different. That is when I saw it. A trickle of blood running down his forearm, poking out from his sleeve, was just the outline of a bite mark. You're infected, aren't you, Jesse? Anger contorted his face again as I said his name. He was on the edge of turning. I could see that now. His twitch movement, his sunken eyes, his pale, sweat-soaked skin. All signs that a person was infected. I placed my hand on the trigger, ready to pull it, well aware that if I fired the then, he would too. We would most likely both go down, and Libby would be alone. However, at least she would be alive. Don't do this. Please. My voice came out hoarse, pleading. Just then, something shifted in his eye. Clarity. For just a brief moment, the old, kind Jesse I knew was there. I'm sorry. He looked scared. Then he pulled the gun back, aiming it at his own head, and fired. The force knocked him sideways, and I watched as his body tumbled over the side of the roof. Libby let out a shriek as I stood in silent horror, my hand clamped over my mouth. I ran to the edge, peering over at his disfigured body as it lay 3 stories down. It took only seconds for the horde to surround him and began ripping into his flesh. I stepped back, nearly tripping on thin air. I seen some dark things. I was no stranger to tragedy. However, it was something I could never get used to. The sound of his croaking apology replayed in my mind. Sorry for what? For killing Paul? For not making his bite known sooner? I wondered if he had even known what he had even done to Paul. I know the infection took hold before the person was completely lost, stealing bit by bit until there was nothing left. I knew I would see Jesse again. He would eventually join me in my nightmares, like all the others. Him and Paul would haunt me until I met my own fate one day. Witchetty. Grub servings. 7. Preparation. Time varies based on resistance of ingredients. Ingredients. 1. Eye of newt. 1 toe of frog. 150 grams wool of bat. 1 tongue of dog. 10 scales of dragon. A pinch of dead man's blood. A drop of a virgin's tear. 1 swollen, pus-filled, witchetty grub for flavor. Preparation. A. Acquire pre-selected ingredients from their natural habitats. Successful extraction requires careful attention to prevent accidental damage. 1. Newt. Net the newt in a crumbling inner-city neighborhood. Still in his teens, the newt is most often found in the company of the local drug-dealing street gang he aspires to be part of. His watchful eyes make him a valuable resource. His fresh-faced appearance keeps him discreet. Optimal time to secure is while he keeps watch for the law and rival gang members outside a dilapidated apartment complex, casting furtive glances into alleys. His attention focused on the addicts and intimidating shadows that wander and lurk there. 2. Frog. Fetch the frog. At the edge of an abandoned industrial rooftop on the outskirts of the city. Her athleticism and powerful 20-something-year-old legs have made her a viral sensation, courtesy of elaborate, self-recorded parkour videos in which she scales buildings, leaps between rooftops, and climbs towering structures. The tattooed, shaven-head frog is at her most vulnerable while occupied with setting up her camera gear to record, having practiced her jumps, tested the winds, and psyched herself up for a stunt. 3. Bat. Bag the bat in the darkness and privacy of her lavish bedroom, whilst she slumbers in the soothing shawl of night. Her golden locks, the envy of all at her Ivy League university, will be glowing around her head like a halo on a Hungarian goose-down pillow, while she dreams of fame and stardom as a singer. Take care to wrap the bat's hair neatly around her head 3 times before removing her from her covers and spiriting her away through the unlatched window of her family's Haven Heights home. 4. Dog. Drag the dog from the smoking hut at the rear of a downtown comedy hall, where he smokes alone after a rough set. An up-and-coming stand-up comedian, his wit and sharp tongue are capable of cutting down hecklers with cruel precision. With thick skin but flimsy material, the dog can be secured when the night sighs with disappointment. His smartest punchlines of the evening, the edgy, heckler-baiting insults fresh on his lips. Unalert, his mind preoccupied with feelings of inadequacy, he will prove easy to batter and snare. 5. Dragon. Extract the dragon from the dressing room of a seedy adult film studio, where she sits before a mirror, her reflection betraying the exhaustion in her eyes. Once a promising young woman, the dragon is trapped in the heartless world she was forced into by debt and destitution, performing for cameras and men. As she waits to be recalled to set, white powder residue under her nose, flawless skin glistening under harsh lights, she can be subdued with a chloroform-soaked rag. 6. Dead man and virgin. The dead man and the virgin can be obtained together from the dead man's car as it idles at the edge of a cliff overlooking the bay. The dead man will be fresh from a strenuous workout, basking in the admiration of the virgin, a pleasant distraction. The infatuated virgin, surprised to have secured a popular male's attention, is keen to impress for validation. His cockiness and her insecurity are the perfect combination of toxicity, making them vital ingredients for the pot. As the virgin is coerced to take things to the next stage, anesthetic gas introduced to the vehicle through its exhaust pipe will render them ripe for the picking. 7. Witchetty grub. Remove from the stockpile in the larder, as previously instructed to prepare. B. Once acquired, transport ingredients to cellar and confine. Take care to label correctly. Wrong identification will result in incorrect ingredients introduced to the pot, spoiling the potency of the broth. C. Inflict sufficient emotional trauma over the course of 24 hours to ensure ingredients are primed. Fear and confusion should be present before proceeding. Screams, pleas for mercy, and despair are key to achieving optimal tenderness. Cooking instructions. Step 1. Eye of newt. Prep. Approach the newt chained in a corner, his fearful blue irised eyes wide. His youthful terror and questioning of the rebellious attitude that led to him falling in with the wrong crowd when he could have stayed home with parents who offered love and tried to teach him right from wrong will serve as a solid base flavor. Marinate. Let him feel the knife's serrated touch against his cheek, heightening his fear and emptying his bladder. Remain silent as you peer into his soul and exhale fetid breath onto his face. Smirk as you move the tip of the blade to the swollen, tear-infused bag beneath his left eye and start to shimmy it in. Allow the newt to scream as you pierce the eyeball, making your black, crooked teeth the last thing it sees. Harvest. Extract the eye swiftly, ensuring it stays moist. Sever the optic nerve with teeth and drop the excavated eyeball into the cauldron of bubbling broth, allowing its partner to watch from the head it remains housed in. Step 2. Toe of frog. Prep. Open the door to the cage of the naked frog, whose legs twitch as they struggle against their restraints. Her death-defying leaps and infinite recklessness have been reduced to paralysis and nervous kicks. This now caged force of once unstoppable urban adventure will add a tangy zest to the mix. Marinate. Trace a wart-covered finger along the side of a foot, then over each one of her toes, drawing out a series of gasps. Let her realize that no jump can save her as she shirks away. Grab the foot firmly and place the blade against its biggest toe, making it quiver and curl. Watch the frog's face contort and savor her cries as the knife digs deep into the skin. Harvest. Sever the toe at the joint. Allow it to twitch in your fingers as she cries in pain. Eyes locked on the almost insignificant but oh so important digit that aids with her balance. Drop the wriggling toe into the cauldron, letting its spasms add ripples to the broth. Step 3. 150 of wool of bat. Prep. Release the bat from her crate and comb out her lustrous locks, tangled and matted from confinement. The scent of confusion and fear for her life is sickly sweet, but the odor of her wounded pride outweighs it. Even in captivity, the bat's thoughts fixate on her unwashed hair, the long, golden strands that are the source of her appetizing appearance. Marinate. Run fingers through hair, untangling strands with care, and soothing the bat with gentle shushes. Admire its luster. Appreciate its silky, smooth feel. Let your withered flesh tingle under its softness. Watch her grimace through tears, trying to coax out some mercy. Then grip a handful of hair and yank back her head. Lift the shears and slide their rusted edges either side of the strands, savoring the scream that slips forth with the snip. Harvest. Shear off 10 handfuls of finest silken hair and place on weighing scales until 150 grams of the bat's identity are harvested. Let her sob uncontrollably as she watches her beauty diminish, mourning the loss of her hair like the frog mourns her toe. Toss the locks into the cauldron and stir, imbuing the soup with a peppery nuance. Step 4. Tongue of dog. Prep. Leave the dog tied to his chair, blindfold in place, but remove the gag from his mouth. His trademark smirk will be absent, replaced with the babbling pleas that come from an understanding that no witty repartee can save him. Allow him to lick his dry lips one last time, moistening them with the mock-yielding lubrication that gives them their tartness. Marinate. Let the dog wield his words like weapons, shouting, cursing, trying to bargain with the devil. Stand quietly as he struggles against his restraints, powerless in the face of unyielding malice. When his adrenaline-fueled vitriol falters, take his chin in a vice-like grip and tug his tongue from his mouth. Slide the shears over the muscle and ease them together. Harvest. Slice through the tongue, severing it cleanly at the base. Watch crimson blood spurt forth, filling the dog's mouth and coating his chin. The ragged stump will quiver as he chokes, his sharp tongue reduced to a useless lump. Toss the fleshy piece into the broth, seasoning it with the sourness of insults. Step 5. 10 scales of dragon. Prep. Remove the hood from the head of the dragon, where she lies strapped to a metal gurney. Dark circles under her eyes mar her otherwise flawless skin and the exotic looks that brought her success. Her fingers tremble from the withdrawal, gnawing at her veins, while the makeup caked on her face fails to conceal the bitterness that came from a life she never wanted. Bitterness that will add complexity to the brew. Marinate. Stand behind the dragon, and caress her cheeks, pressing into plump, pillowy skin. Feel her body freeze as your nails scratch the surface. Hear her breathing quicken as she wonders what new hell is about to unfold. No words will leave her lips, even when the razor is brought into view and left to hover over her nose. But the flicker of horror in her eyes will betray her terror. Bring the blade down and slice through her supple cheek like butter harvest. Carve 5 1/3 strips of skin from each cheek. As her flesh peels away, suppressed screams will at last fill the cellar, and blood will soften the dried-up makeup on her face. Drop each strip into the cauldron, watching as they sink into the broth, the beauty that defined her, infusing the mixture with a savory depth. Step 6. A pinch of dead man's blood. Prep. Circle the dead man as he dangles from a meat hook, kicking and thrashing. This man, this bully, this self-obsessed, so-called alpha male who has spent his life stepping on others, viewing women as objects and treating people as conquests, will add an acrid taste to the blend, which, when balanced with the richness of the other ingredients, will create something truly sensational. Marinate. Lunge from the front and use shears to cut his shirt from waist to neck. Expose chiseled abs and toned chest. Then replace shears with dagger and start to stab. Apply slight pressure at first, tenderizing the flesh with shallow punctures, enough to extract delicate beads of blood. The dead man's bravado will crumble as the jabs become deeper. Wait for the realization that he cannot escape to appear in his eyes. Then draw the dagger back and plunge it with full force into his chest. Harvest. Guide the blade through ribs into the dead man's heart. Watch the fire in his eyes fade as his life-giving treacle spills out. With the dagger protruding from his chest, hold a tarnished teaspoon close to the wound. Wait for his last wheezing breath to rattle out, then catch a drop of syrup in the spoon, drizzling it into the cauldron to add pungency. Step 7. A drop of virgin's tear. Prep. Release the virgin from the cupboard under the stairs. Take her by the arm and drag her from the dark into the cellar. As her eyes adjust to the light, let her witness the gruesome sight of her dead boyfriend hanging from a hook, blood beneath him. Marvel at the way in which she mourns him and howls in torment. Her naivety and emotional dependency preventing her from seeing he is no loss. Her saved innocence promising a nectarous punch. Marinate. Stand back and let the scene unfold. Listen to the virgin's cries grow louder. Watch her collapse onto the cold, hard floor and crawl away. Witness her growing terror as her eyes go from eyeless newt to toeless frog, from hairless bat to tongueless dog, from red-faced dragon to dangling dead man, again then to you. Approach slowly, sponge in hand, and Digya at her tear-soaked cheeks. Harvest. Allow the sponge to be saturated with untainted tears, rich in sorrow. Then leave the virgin to curl up in a ball, covering her ears, squeezing her eyes shut, crying as she tries to deny reality. Carefully squeeze the sponge out over the cauldron, letting her essence and purity drip into the broth, enriching it with subtle, candied sweetness. Step 8. Witchetty grub. Drop the withseti grub into the pot as a final garnish. Stir 6 times. Cover, then leave to ferment. Serving. Decant the concoction into a jar. Screw on a rubber teat, sealing in its rich, aromatic flavor. Suck a single drop into your mouth. Feel your body shudder as the magic flows through it, transforming your hair and your skin, restoring your youth. Indulge a fit of cackling, your voice echoing through the chamber. Then offer a word of gratitude as you depart. Optional flourish. Before leaving, kiss a spell-cast crystal and roll it to the center of the floor. In time, when the ingredients feel brave enough to assist one another, they will turn their traumatized gaze upon it, each seeing in it the future they have been spared. The newt, murdered by his gang after failing as a lookout during a hit. The frog, falling to her death as a result of an overly ambitious jump. The bat, caught in a house fire, her hair igniting to prevent her escape. The dog, stabbed by a heckler after an insult goes too far. The dragon, overdosing to escape the life her looks keep her trapped in. The virgin, dying at the hands of the abusive dead man. Extract from Witchetty Grub, Edition 7. Recipes for preservation. Broths using humane ingredients and ethical processing methods. Past imperfect W. Mentions of mental and physical abuse. Bill sat bolt upright in the hotel bed, heart pounding to a familiar refrain. The dream had reasserted itself with a vengeance from the moment he'd seen the updated list of people attending the conference. One name had stood out. Dake Scratchard was the name of the boy who'd haunted Bill Brown's life more years than he cared to remember. Dreams fueled by past memories disturbed his nights when equal amounts of dread and fear surged through his veins, rendering him helpless. As always, the nightmare was a variation on a theme. In it, Bill was a teenage boy running from the gang. He often came close to evading capture, but at the last minute tripped over his shoelaces or some other encumbrance. Then he found himself falling flat on his face outside the old school toilets, the inner doors of which rose up like whited sepulchres. Up close, he could see every cell of his tormentor's face. "Ginger needs to be taught a lesson," came out of that hate-filled mouth. A bully, aided by his contemptible band of followers, with their menacing chants of "Ginger, Ginger, Ginger." Even now, their words filled the corridors of his mind like a background hiss. "No!" The sound seemed to come from somewhere outside, as if it belonged to someone else. "Not him. You're just begging for it, Billy Ginger. If the teachers won't correct you, we must do it for them." Billy knew no teacher would come. They were never there when you needed them. In any case, the gang always had some lackey watching out. Soon they'd have him crawling on his hands and knees, scooting about like an insect, while they kicked him on the hard stone floor, their mocking jeers running through him. He was nothing more than a piece of meat to be hauled about. For them, the high point was shoving his face into the toilet bowl. The stench was the least of it. Clinging for support, he tried to keep everything tight shut while they flushed. Knowing he could not hold out for long, he spluttered to be let go. Then, just as he was about to give up, a final flush signaled his release. He was pulled up, squirming like a rat from a sewer, and left heaving on the floor. For a few minutes, he lay there curled and defenseless, all resistance gone, until the next time, and the time after that. Something so primal, so feral. He could smell it now. Even after all this time, he was defined by it, as if the abuse had become part of a warped pattern of D and A, making him only half human. But somehow, he'd known he was worth more than that. At least his dog seemed to think so. Through it all, the only thing that kept Bill going was the thought of the black Labrador faithfully waiting in the porch. Back home, Kelpie licked away the wounds and salt tears, stayed beside him till the pain subsided. Without Kelpie, he would not have survived. For the purity of a dog's heart knows no bounds. Switching on the bedside lamp, Bill waited until his breathing steadied. Coughing, he climbed into a dressing gown and stepped out onto a small balcony. In the courtyard below, the air was prescient with a damp chill. A few lone trees were scattering leaves marking the onset of winter. Inhaling a sneaky cigarette, Bill considered his options. It had all happened so long ago, yet the dream had reignited the past, making him feel he could never escape its clutches. If Bill recited the facts of his life enough times, he almost convinced himself of their worth. On paper, he'd worked hard, got married and divorced, and had a son he barely saw. He'd mostly married his wife to please his father because she came from a better background. and look where that had got him. It wasn't his ex's fault if along the way he'd supplemented whatever was missing with a few women he was physically attracted to, but not much else. In the end, it had been like ships passing in the night, all except for Bella. With her, he'd come close to casting a loveless marriage aside. But in the end, something had stopped him. The risk of getting it wrong had been too great, but all that was in the past. Although Bella had recently returned to the company where they both worked, albeit in a less demanding role, he rarely saw her these days. And according to rumors, she was now with someone in the shower. Bill imagined washing the past down the plug hole. Soon he planned to do just that. The only fly in the ointment, of course, was Bella. He wasn't sure whether she'd be attending the conference. Really, bumping into her was the least of his worries. But if he did, so be it. He hadn't actually seen her name on the list of attendees, so it seemed unlikely. Overall, it would be easier if she didn't attend, because that afternoon, Bill was making his first big speech in his new role as Regional Operations Manager. As if there wasn't enough going on without having to deal with affairs of the heart. The speech, eagerly anticipated, was expected to be the highlight of the day. In the hotel room, examining the set of knives his father had given him as an 18th birthday present, Bill was confronted by powerful emotions. Before him were a dazzling array of sharp pieces, all with wooden handles for an extra firm grip. It was almost pleasurable selecting the one with the pointed end. He carefully placed it in a sheath and adding it to a concealed section of his briefcase. In the mirror, he observed hair that was thinning a little at the sides. Other than that, it was still thick and brown, with just a hint of chestnut. Impressive in a well-cut suit, he was tall enough to be considered distinguished. To some, his features might be regarded as handsome. His eyes, however, were preternaturally bright. Sighing deeply, he exited the room. Clutching his laptop and briefcase, he made his way along the plushly carpeted corridor, entered the lift, and headed the 3 floors down to the conference room area. Psyching himself up for whatever lay ahead, he focused on his achievements. Only by drawing on every retail milestone was he able to make sense of the wasteland that was his emotional life. His mind's eye framed the certificates that took pride of place on his home office wall, charting his journey from sales assistant to the coveted role of Regional Operations Manager for one of the country's most successful chain stores. Stores that sold fashionable clothes and accessories for prices most people could afford. Bill's journey into a better life had only really begun when his parents had moved from a London suburb to a city in the Midlands. Then aged 15, he'd welcomed the move with open arms, for it had given him a chance to start afresh in a place where no one knew him. especially at school. He had loved walking unrecognized through the city's streets and visiting its ancient cathedral. One Saturday morning, plucking up courage, he'd walked into one of the city's department stores and landed himself a Saturday job in the menswear department. When he returned home, his mom made him a cup of tea, and Kelpie wagged a warm greeting. You could do a lot worse. They've got people queuing up to get a place in that store, his mom had commented. Then, examining him more closely, she observed, "You've darkened your hair. Isn't that what Elvis Presley did?" "I expect so. I never liked my natural color, and I want to fit in at this school." That was the closest he'd come to admitting the bullying at his old school. He never told anyone about the suicidal thoughts. Chazo, he couldn't miss her. Bella was a figure of light, breaking the conference room formality and wearing the most distinctive outfit. To him, she was the classiest person there, surrounded as she was by an adoring team of managers at one of the middle tables. Distracted by her presence, he could hardly wait for a chance to speak to her. The chance came while she was lining up to choose from a tray of canapes during the lunch break. "I wasn't expecting you to be here, Bella," he said. "I wasn't expecting to be here, but there was a change of plan. It's so good to see you." He found himself saying, "Well, I missed the company and the people. I wasn't the right fit for the new position, even if it was a promotion. It seemed fortuitous when my old vacancy came up again." "So, you didn't have a problem with going back to your old role?" "There's no need to avoid using the word demotion. I won't be offended," she laughed. "I came to realize I didn't need all the hassle that goes with a high-powered job. I realized I'd made a mistake, and the opportunity came to rectify it. I want a simple life, especially now I'm single. Don't worry, it's all worked out for the best." He wasn't right for me either. Bill could hardly believe what he was hearing. "It's really good to see you," he said again. "I'm glad you think that," she said, smiling brightly. Catching up with Bella had been great. So much so, watching her sleeping the next morning, Bill had almost forgotten about the other thing. He decided he'd know what to do when the time came. If it came, Bill was pouring coffee when Bella opened her eyes. They were warm, like Kelpie's had once been. "That smells good," she said. "I remembered you like it's strong." The world outside remained foggy and damp, but for the moment, none of that mattered. Fully dressed, Bill joined Bella on the bed. "What's the matter? You look like you've got the world on your shoulders," she said kindly. "Nothing. Just the conference. A lot to think about." But that was only partly true. If only he could tell her what was really on his mind. Part of him wondered whether meeting Bella again was purely coincidental or a sign he should let the past go once and for all. He might have said more, but then the phone rang. "Good luck with the speech." "Not that you're going to need it," Bella said, getting up and kissing him. Down. On the way to the conference room, Bill overheard a conversation between two hotel staff members. "Are the cameras still out?" "Only on the third floor." "Also, The ones by the bathroom. They're down, too. Okay, not good. How long before they are fixed? A few hours at most. Maintenance will get it sorted. It won't affect the general running of things. Bill felt almost disappointed to hear the news about the cameras. After his night with Bella, he'd been on the verge of scrapping his original plan. Now fate seemed to be pulling him back. Yet he still hadn't come across his nemesis. Chapter. About 40 minutes into the second day of conference, a man best described as nondescript entered the hall. Head down, he weaved his way to the numbered seat. Bill clocked him, and his heart sank. Something of the man's stance reminded him of Dake Scratchard grown older. But was it him? He couldn't be sure. 2 hours into the conference, during the talk on sustainability, the man scurried towards one of the exits, and all doubt vanished. Shriveled he might be, but it was definitely Scratchard, galvanized into action. Bill left his seat and headed for the nearest exit. Gripping his case so tightly his fingers hurt, he followed the figure until he disappeared into the bathroom. Unless he had to, Bill generally avoided public bathrooms. But this was going to be the exception. Adrenaline flooding through him, he quietly opened the door and stepped inside. Other than a pulsing through his ears and the sound of a dripping tap, all was quiet. Then he heard a retching coming from one of the cubicles. A minute later, the door opened and Scratchard stepped out. Engrossed in his own suffering, he ran to the nearest sink and stood there heaving, watching unobserved. Bill was torn between revulsion and an intense hatred. Mostly, he was seized by a hatred for all he'd been put through, overcome by a rage for the way this pathetic being had ruined so much of his life. It was too late to change his mind now. The die was cast. Gripping the knife, he advanced, his anger rising to a peak. Suddenly, the bathroom door sprang open, and to his astonishment, Bella entered. She came and stood behind him, putting her arms round his waist. Then, opening his fist, she carefully removed the knife from his hand and put it behind her back. "It's not the answer," she whispered, hurriedly placing it in her bag. It all seemed to happen in slow motion. The atmosphere in the room shifted. Startled out of his sickness, Bill's childhood enemy locked eyes with his victim in the mirror. Both men were shaking, one from the effects of illness, the other from the horror of what might have been. "What the hell?" Scratchard broke out. Then there was a flash of recognition as the years fell back. "Surely not. I wasn't sure if it was you in the meeting. Probably because your hair is different. But it's Ginger Bill, isn't it? Only the last time I saw you." The words trailed off, vanished into the unknown. "But you never did see me," Bill said through gritted teeth. "All you saw was a weak boy you could bully because of his hair color. As I recall, the last time I saw you and your sick gang, you'd forced my head down the bog. Have you any idea what that does to someone? Did I do that? Dake's face reddened. I was a bit of a jerk in those days. If it's any consolation, life hasn't exactly treated me well. As you can see, I'm not a well man. The edges blurring, Bill felt the first stirrings of pity. What's actually wrong with you, Scratchard? Calling him by his surname felt like a minor victory. He'd never dared call him anything in school. Dake shook his head despairingly. If it's not one thing, it's another these days. I had heart trouble a few years ago, and now this. I keep having to running to the toilet and have a raging thirst. You need medical attention, Bella said unexpectedly. You're showing all the signs of severe diabetes. My father got like that before he was diagnosed. 10 minutes later, Bill was sitting with his childhood tormentor in the lobby, waiting for assistance. I'm sorry for making your school life hard, Dake muttered, unable to meet Bill's eyes. It was worse than that. You bullied me to the point I didn't feel life was worth living. Why did you? I need to know, Bill demanded. Dake searched what remained of his soul for answers. I don't know, he admitted at last. Maybe it made me feel more in control. Life was miserable at home, and at school, I was somebody in front of the other kids. The rest of the day passed in a blur. But Bill somehow found the strength to get through his talk. He got a good reception at the end, and he couldn't help noticing Bella was clapping the hardest. What made you come into the bathroom like that? He asked her much later. I couldn't believe it when I saw you there. You kept saying his name in your sleep, saying you're dead over and over. I haven't forgotten the nightmares you had when we were together before. Imagine what would have happened if you hadn't appeared, Bella. It doesn't bear thinking about, she said. If you want us to make a go of this, you've got to promise me you're going to get help. The past will always get in the way if you don't. It turned out to be an easy promise to keep. More than a year after that fateful encounter, the terrible dreams are a thing of the past. Though his old enemy is hardly on Bill's Christmas card list, he no longer regards him as a threat. Now Bill dreams of walking through the park with Bella, taking it in turns to throw a ball for their new dog. Somehow, he feels very close to achieving it. Dig deep. Other than a faint glow coming from one of the back rooms, the town's charity shop was in darkness, its front door firmly closed. Although it had opened in 1985, the building had been used commercially since the 1800s, when it had variously been a pharmacy, a bank, and a tavern. The shop was close to the river in Marpleton, a pleasant English market town which had once been home to a nearby priory. In ancient times, monks had wandered back and forth to sell their wares at a market which still existed in diminished form across the road. Regulars were now peering through the shop window, but the main lights stayed off. A few of the shop's helpers were huddled in the back room. Patrick, the treasurer, had collected the spare keys from the greengrocer to let them in. The gatherers were addressing one topic, namely, why their long-serving manager, Rhea, had failed to open up the day before. I just can't understand it, Ivy, one of the shop's founding members, said. I've never known her not to turn up, unless she's on holiday. In all the years I've known Rhea, she's never had a day's sickness. Wasn't she going to New Zealand to visit her sister? Patrick asked. She was, but not until the following week. It's in the shop diary. Here, take a look. Ivy tapped the relevant pages meaningfully. I'm not doubting you, Ivy, but she may have got the dates wrong. She wasn't in the habit of making mistakes. Ivy's loyalty knew no bounds. Patrick adopted a different approach. You've tried Rhea's landline, I take it, several times. Each time, it went straight to answer phone. Right. Still, I expect we're worrying over nothing. But you have to admit, she has been a bit distracted lately, someone piped up. Patrick turned to Silvana hopefully, but she shook her head. I've tried her on her mobile, but nothing. Silvana was a refugee who had joined the shop 2 years earlier. Since Rhea had taken her under her wing when she first came to England, her English had improved markedly. Silvana had been on the verge of admitting her true feelings for Rhea. Reality had crushed the likelihood of her returning to her homeland anytime soon, and been replaced by something entirely unexpected. An overwhelming love for another human being. Silvana's great wish was to know whether that love was returned. Rhea clearly liked her, but was it worth risking their friendship for more? The path to such an admission seemed littered with obstacles. Now, the mystery of Rhea's whereabouts could be added to an already growing list. Did Rhea say anything about changing her holiday plans, Silvana? Patrick asked, determined to get to the bottom of things. No, I went to her house for my lesson last Wednesday. She told me she'd be away all next week. Silvana had considered the matter carefully. Yes, that is so. Patrick said. I guess I'll have to contact the area manager about reopening the shop. You'll need to do that. Volunteer phone numbers are stored in the locked cabinet, and only Rhea has the key, Ivy interjected. Head office have contact numbers too. Everyone knew Rhea always carried a set of keys on a fob attached to a waistband. Patrick joked she secretly had a cellar key for the shop's more trying customers, to which he'd received an enigmatic smile. The actual cellar key had supposedly vanished in the mists of time. Certainly, there was no call to use the cellar with ample storage space elsewhere. In any case, the cellar door was kept permanently locked, preventing anyone getting trapped if there was a fire. Patrick scrutinized the rota sheets. Maybe Judd would be willing to help if we reopen the shop, he suggested. Silvana, who distrusted Judd, said nothing. 3 months earlier, dressed in black jeans and hoodie, and trailed by a mournful cocker spaniel, Judd had shown up to inquire about volunteering. When Silvana had bent to pat his dog, it had backed off, whimpering. She gets nervous around new people, Judd had explained, tucking away the banking money Patrick had gone to fetch Rhea. A young man's inquiring about volunteering, he'd told her. Shall I send him through? What's he like? Rhea was wearily tapping information into the computer at her desk. He seems pleasant enough. His dog's rather nervous. Rhea massaged her aching neck. Send him through, she said. Rhea had confided in Sylvana about her difficulty in getting references for Judd Dig Deep. Eventually, he'd presented her with 2 typed ones, supposedly from an ex-employer. With typical thoroughness, Rhea had rung one of the numbers to learn more about the new helper. When a voice answered, sounding suspiciously like Judd's, she'd intended to investigate further. However, other things had intervened. A few weeks after this uncharacteristic omission, Judd was indeed proving to be an asset. Willing to turn his hand to anything, it was a relief not having to lift heavy sacks and boxes donated by the public from one end of the shop to the other. With little guidance, Judd had transformed one of the sorting rooms, leaving it immaculate. One evening, when Sylvana cycled past the back of the shop, she noticed a group of undesirables hanging with Judd, engrossed in conversation. She hurried past, hoping she hadn't been seen. She raised her concerns to Rhea, who told her it was nothing to worry about, that she'd keep an eye on things, and bafflingly added, I'd rather you didn't mention this to anyone else. And the day the shop reopened, without Rhea at the helm, was Sylvana's birthday. Patrick invited her to join him later for one of his wife's specials, homemade pizza and pear wine. The food tasted delicious, but she pushed her plate to one side. You're still worried about Rhea, aren't you? Patrick observed. Her cell phone is dead. It's strange. I knocked on her door last night, but still no answer. Patrick got up. I tell you what, I happen to know Rhea's neighbor, Angela, from the book club. She looks after the garden when Rhea goes away. She may well have a spare key. I'm sure there's nothing to worry about, but it wouldn't do any harm to check if everything is all right. Sylvana was relieved. That's a great idea. Thanks, Patrick. I've been known to have a few in my time. Come on, get your coat. Let's see if we can solve this mystery. Half an hour later, the pair were standing in Rhea's house. The hallway led into an open-plan kitchen diner with gleaming countertops and state-of-the-art gadgets. The smell of coffee lingered invitingly. When Rhea's partner, Lindsay, had died 5 years earlier, she'd left her with a generous insurance payout. Sylvana sighed, remembering the other day when she and Rhea had drawn close over a bottle of wine. Rhea had even given her a present, only to be opened on your birthday, she instructed. But beneath the gaiety, she'd been out of sorts. Rhea had brushed aside Sylvana's offer of help with a brisk, I'm fine. I'll check down here if you do upstairs, Patrick said, jolting Sylvana back to the present. The passport was lying on the bedside table. However, the photograph bore little resemblance to the person Sylvana had come to love and admire. having spent time working for a private detective agency when she was younger. Instinct overrode caution, and she began a meticulous search for clues. Predictably, Ria's shop keys were lying on the bedside table. More unexpected was the discovery of another set of keys attached to a ring with a tag labeled Cellar. "Are you all right?" Patrick called up from the bottom of the staircase. "I'm okay." Silvana tucked the cellar keys into her bag. Then she remembered Ria's present and opened it. She was surprised to find a pay-as-you-go phone, already charged up. "Well," Patrick exclaimed, "did you find anything?" "Just this." She gave him the passport. "That's odd. It appears she never made it to New Zealand after all. Maybe it's time to involve the police." "What? Right now? It is rather late. I doubt they'll want to be disturbed tonight." Patrick thought of the half-opened bottle of wine waiting back home. "I'll act tomorrow morning. Shall I walk you back?" "No need. I can take care of myself," Silvana said firmly. Casa. The moon was her only companion as Silvana descended the cellar steps at the back of the shop. With growing unease, she encased her hands in a pair of gloves and took off her shoes. She didn't want anyone to know of her presence. After 3 attempts, the door creaked open, and she was met by a cloying damp, overlaid by something else, something unpleasant. Tensing, she flicked on her phone torch and spotted a narrow corridor with another door at the end. Filled with foreboding, she slowly turned the handle. She smelt the body before she saw it. Wearing the trademark hoodie, the bloating, discolored thing in front of her, could hardly be called human. Judd lay slumped against an upturned table, his eyes staring and opaque. Silvana covered her face with a handkerchief to prevent retching and inspected the scene, noting the bloodied head and smashed face lying beside it. The blood had pooled and dried, staining the clothes and floor. She was no expert, but if the rotting undertones were anything to go by, death had probably occurred a few days earlier. Even then, horror was blunted by relief. So long as it wasn't Ria, she had the strength for anything. But where was Ria? Adjusting to the dimness, Silvana tried to make sense of her surroundings. Some crudely constructed shelves, filled with storage tubs and packets, lay stacked against one of the walls. The place was obviously some kind of drugs den. Could Judd's death have been the result of a disagreement with other gang members? Silvana's stomach lurched. What if they turned up and found her? She'd only just locked the cellar door and picked up her shoes when she heard voices on the driveway. Somehow, she managed to scramble behind one of the bins underneath the fire escape. Hardly daring to breathe, she waited until the scuffling feet passed, and the gang disappeared down the cellar steps. Then, she bolted into the night as fast as her trembling legs would carry her. She would decide what to do when she got home. So, halfway across the town's park, muffled ringtones came from her bag. "Silvana?" The voice was clear as day at the other end of the line. "Rhea, is it really you? Thank God. Are you all right? Where are you calling from? Talk to me. If I tell you, you must keep it to yourself," Rhea said urgently. "Of course. By the way, I have your keys." "The shop keys? The cellar keys? Long story. I have just been down there. I found him. Judd. Dead. It was horrible." Silvana began to laugh hysterically as the shock kicked in. "You went into the cellar?" Rhea repeated. "Why? I needed to know if you were all right. I was so afraid. I was going to find you, not him. When I saw your passport, I knew you couldn't have gone abroad. That something must have happened. I didn't get the chance. What happened? I will tell you, but not now. Not on the phone. Patrick is planning to go to the police tomorrow about your passport," Rhea asked. "Did you touch anything when you went into the cellar? Did you touch him?" "No." Silvana's teeth were chattering from shock. "It's cold outside. I was wearing gloves. But what do you know about Judd? Why were you wearing gloves?" "I don't know. I had a bad feeling. I didn't want to be implicated in anything. Back home, I once worked at a detective agency. I learned about not touching crime scenes." "You may want to call the police," Rhea said. "But please, can I ask you not to tell them I got in contact, or about me giving you the phone? We'll meet soon. That is, if you want to. I'll understand if you don't want anything more to do with me. Of course I want to meet you." It seemed silly pretending now. "It's all I think about." Ciao. Silvana's heart flipped when she saw the distant figure standing on the pier below. The matinee performance at the Pavilion Theater was in full swing, and the pier was almost deserted. She came up behind Rhea, patting her on the shoulder. "Hey," Rhea turned, instantly relaxing when she saw her friend. "Hey." Silvana sank into Rhea's arms. For a long time, the pair embraced. "It's so good to see you," Silvana said. "Likewise." Rhea glanced round. "Does anyone know you're here?" "No." "And I'm so hungry." Rhea grinned. "How about some fish and chips? I'll treat you." "You mean the famous English fish and chips?" Rhea grinned. "I've discovered a great place on the front." She linked arms with Silvana. "Come on, let's eat. Then I'll tell you everything." "Ciao." "Judd was a bad lot," Rhea admitted later. "He was running a drug racket, and I threatened to report him to the police. It doesn't surprise me. But how did you find out?" "Not long after I joined the shop, I was clearing up one of the back rooms and came across a discarded cabinet. There were 2 sets of cellar keys in it. I never told anyone about them, partly because I didn't want a lot of fuss. I wanted to keep it to myself. Unfortunately, Judd caught me coming up the stairs one evening and demanded to store his things there. I didn't like the way he spoke to me. When I refused, he threatened to torture his dog in front of me. He implied if I didn't comply, I'd be next. His eyes were so cold. For the second time in my life, I felt real fear. There would be time enough to ask about the first time, Silvana thought, clasping Rhea's hand. "I'm afraid there's more," Rhea said dully. You probably won't want anything to do with me when you hear the rest. Silvana clutched Ria's hand more tightly. She'd come too far to be brushed aside. "Why don't you let me be the judge of that?" she said firmly. "Whatever it is, we'll bear it together. You see, I love you. I need you to know that. You do?" For a moment, Ria's face shone. "That's a relief," she said, laughing. "I thought it was just me." "Did you?" Silvana laughed too. "I may have had my suspicions, but I didn't want to say anything." "Oh, I'm so happy," Silvana said. "But hold your horses before we get carried away," Ria warned. "Hold my horses?" An English expression. It means don't count your chickens. Count my chickens? Silvana, my love, let me finish my story before you say anything. Okay, sorry. Silvana nibbled a stray chip. Ria was smiling in spite of everything. In the end, I couldn't stand being held to ransom by a bully like Judd. A few days ago, I foolishly decided to confront him in the cellar. He went to grab a knife from the table. There was an old jar on one of the shelves, and as he turned, I smashed it over his head. She shuddered. "I couldn't tell you all this, but I made sure you had the phone before I left. I hoped you'd stay in touch." The day after, I headed here. Not wanting to be traced, I paid for everything with cash. But surely the police will realize you only acted in self-defense, Silvana insisted. Perhaps I should have gone to them straight away, but I couldn't face it. Ria's hesitation was palpable, especially considering what? In spite of the warmth between them, Silvana felt a sudden chill, like someone walking over a grave. "What aren't you telling me?" Ria's voice broke. "I'm terminally ill. At best, I only have months to live. At worst, it will be weeks. I have all the medication I need. I just want to spend my last days in a place with happy memories." I can't believe it. But Silvana knew Ria was speaking the truth. She tried to disguise her anguish. "How long have you known?" she whispered. "I only found out for certain the day before Judd threatened me in the cellar. Maybe I wasn't thinking straight. I should have told the police everything long before. But by then, I was in too deep. I'm going to stay with you." Silvana had never been more certain of anything. Ria shook her head. "Stay with me tonight and go back tomorrow. It won't be long before the police check the cellar. It will look odd if you're not there. I have every faith in your survival skills. Look how far you've come. In the meantime, there's something I want you to have." "What is it?" Ria handed Silvana 2 envelopes. Inside one is a plan of the cellar. After years of searching, I think I may have finally uncovered the sealed entrance to a tunnel leading to the old priory. My father was a historian and suspected there might be one near the shop. The other is a copy of my will. It's my final and dearest wish to make your life better when I've gone.